Hello and welcome to Hosting HR. I'm your host, Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions. And we're currently live across YouTube, Facebook, and also on LinkedIn as well. And we're going to be discussing HR careers, and we're hopeful that you're going to have lots of top tips from our panel today. But feel free to get across any questions that you might have for Caroline, Meirion, or indeed myself, and we'll certainly do our best to make sure we can answer those. Or if you've got any thoughts or anything at all you'd like to say, then feel free to do that in the chat boxes as well. Now, we were due to have another panel member with us. Those of you that were expecting Natalie Ellis, we're very disappointed to say that unfortunately Natalie is not feeling very well and has decided not to join us today. So we wish her very best in terms of you'll get better soon. But yeah, hopefully the three of us will be able to answer any questions and we'll have a good, engaging discussion around HR careers today. So when we're talking about panelists, it makes sense to do some introductions. So Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
So hello, everybody. I'm Caroline Luscombe. As you can probably tell, I'm from the north of England, but I live in Switzerland. So I'm calling you in from sunny Lucerne this evening. And it's great to be invited onto the panel. Just a bit about my background. I've been in HR, 38 years. I say that quietly. Now retired. Started my career in finance. And most recently, I was the head of HR for Sanofi. Before that, Holcim, it was Lafarge Holcim when I joined. But I've also worked in many sectors. I worked for Syngenta. I was the head of HR for Syngenta, also in Switzerland, and worked at GE2 in a variety of different roles. I'm married. I have 2 grown-up children. And so coming up for 2 years for retirement now. So I'm spending a lot of time walking, but so it's good to be back to be able to talk to some of my HR colleagues.
Good, thank you, Caroline. Are your children HR professionals?
Charlotte did a master's in HR.
Okay.
She's no longer in HR. Then she did another degree in planning. So I don't know if it's a good or a bad example. So she was in HR for a while, but I think it's probably good not to have 2 HR people in the panel.
Okay, excellent. So excellent. So Meirion, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. Meirion Gravell. I can probably tell I'm originally from South Wales. And yeah, I've been in HR for 13 years, a bit like Caroline, and also like Caroline, have enjoyed, and some might say endured, a multi-sector career. So I started off in utilities and generally moved up the M4 through printing and AstraZeneca and Canon and Santander. And then sort of latterly moved into some private equity roles within mid-sized businesses within FMCG and outsourcing. And I'm currently interim people director with Falck UK. I haven't sworn, it's okay. So Falck UK is part of a global provider of passenger and patient transport businesses, amongst other entities. So three kids. Keris yesterday celebrated her 20th, 19th, and 18th birthday party in one due to lockdown, and we as a hungover family are suffering accordingly. So I've also set up a little business called People Praxis, which I did about 18 months ago, around advising mid-sized businesses on people, culture, and organizational effectiveness. And part of that, I've met some great HR leaders and managed to coach them a little on what's worked for me, and probably more powerfully, what hasn't worked for me. The mistakes you make are often more powerful than anything else. So yeah, delighted to be here tonight and to share views with Caroline and also Leon. I'm sure you'll weave your views into this program as well, as you've teased Caroline and I before the show.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one of the shows, of all the shows that I've done so far with hosting HR, this is probably the one where I may have a little bit more to say, in the sense of, obviously I'm talking to people in their HR careers and have been for the last 11 years. So I've seen a lot of CVs, I've seen a lot of careers and decisions that people make, and I've heard all those. So yeah, it's probably the one of all of the shows where I've probably got the most potentially to add. But so yeah, I'll chip in with a few bits where I feel, and if I agree with you guys on something, I might say. If I disagree, I might say as well. So we'll see how that goes.
Nice.
But yeah, it's time for 2 lies, 1 truth. Yeah, that's right. So yes, it's as we always do after the introductions, it's time for the 2 lies, 1 truth. This is where we get to know our panelists in a slightly different way, where we'll each tell 3 facts about themselves, and at the end of the show, we'll try and work out which one was indeed the truth out of the 3 facts. So we'll stay in the same order. So Caroline, would you like to tell us your 3 facts?
Well, fact number 1, my grandfather was born in 1866. Number 2, I played hockey for my county, that's Lancashire, under 16s. Number 3, if I were to relive my career, finance would probably be my first choice rather than HR.
Okay. Interesting. Meirion, what are your 3?
So my most complicated fact is that once my wife and I had to taste 32 bottles of water before getting on a flight. My second fact is that my father was an opera singer.
Okay.
My third fact is that I'm useless at making up lies or facts.
Okay, right. Well, that's going to be interesting at the end of the show. So certainly, if you're more interested in the 2 lies, 1 truth, then hang around to the end, and we'll talk about HR careers in between all of that. But yes, we'll let's start talking a bit more about obviously HR careers. So obviously, I get asked lots of questions around this sort of stuff day to day. It seemed to be to make a lot of sense to go through this in terms of, and to allow people to ask any questions. So if you're watching live and you'd like to ask any questions, then feel free to do so. These are our opinions. So, you may not necessarily agree with them. It's not a criticism of any decisions that you may have made within your career now or in the past, but these are just views that we have from our experiences, I suppose. So, yeah, if you disagree, that's absolutely fine. We're not aiming to criticize anybody or any decisions they make, but we hope there might be some tips and things that will help you to achieve your career goals. So I'm going to start with the start, which makes sense. So I actually had a question come through from, I hope I'm saying this right, a Chelsea Tyag, who said that she's completing her master's at the moment in human resources management. And she wanted to ask the panel, and she said that she wouldn't be able to join us live, but wants to get this question across, is how should she prepare for her first HR role when she finishes her master's degree? So I'm going to go with the same order. So Caroline, would you like to give any advice to Chelsea?
Well, first of all, congratulations, Chelsea, on hopefully completing your master's soon. And I was the mother of a daughter who did the same thing. So I'm not sure that I'm the best person because I didn't actually start my career in HR. But look, let me just say a few things. I think the important thing is actually starting your career in HR, preparing for your first role, is actually no different from if you were going into any other profession. I would say really try to understand the business that you're joining. If you've got a mentor, and I would urge, that's one of the things I'm going to keep coming back to actually, finding a good mentor, it doesn't matter if it's in the profession, but someone that you can trust and you can share ideas with will be a very good thing. So that would be a good start. Because you're going to be in HR, I would say it's going to be really important not only to know about your business, because I think it's really important that HR shows that they are in touch with the business, but it's also to really understand the culture and the people. I would say that's most important, to decide upfront whether the culture is going to fit you, because if you get that wrong, that's not going to be a great start. And given that you've just spent a year, I think, studying about all of the different theories and case studies, and you will be writing your thesis probably, and it probably is an obvious thing, but don't expect the practice to be always like the theory. I think it's quite nice to try and apply some of the theory if you can, but you'll find actually that, that sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. And I suppose the last 2 years have said something as well, and I'm lucky because I didn't have to work too much during that time. But your challenge is going to be if you're remote working. I have a son who's 28, and I was glad he started his career before he had to do all of this. But try and find every opportunity you can to actually get to know your colleagues in person, because Zoom isn't a great way to really, understand the culture. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Meirion, would you add to that?
Yeah, as Caroline says, practice and theory are very, very different. So I guess I would say, first of all, cherish the theory and the models you've learnt. George Box's famous quote, all models are wrong, some are useful. You're about to find out which models are useful, and apply them, test and sense the impact, and look for the areas where they do work and don't, and then amend them. But it's practice and praxis, and take theory and apply and learn and go again and go again and go again. You will form your own models that is right for you in that business. Context is everything. What is right in one company isn't necessarily the right in the other one. So cherish the models, but apply them, change them, and modify them. And also, look, you are now an expert in these models. Your role is to simplify, but not oversimplify. Too often we get battered by time and line managers and the P&L and the 12-week review cycle, and we end up deploying simplistic solutions, which are worse than overly complex ones. So you're the expert, back yourself, hang on to those models, apply them and simplify them and change them until they work as best they can in the context you're in. So just be pragmatic, but don't forget them, cherish them, and apply them pragmatically and simplify.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of this, in terms of the questions at the beginning, so Natalie, who was obviously due to be with us, and I've just seen a comment in the chat that she's obviously looks like she's watching along. And obviously Natalie did a book called Launch Your HR Career. And I mean, that's certainly one of the places I would say is a really good starting spot for anybody who wants to get into HR, whether that's they've completed their masters or indeed come from other professions. And this is the sort of the follow-up question, I suppose, because I mean, Caroline, you mentioned obviously you started in finance, so would the advice be kind of the same if you were coming from I see a lot of CHROs, for example, that might cross over from that were in the finance side and moved over into this HR leadership positions. Would the advice be the same in terms of if you were moving from another profession into HR? Would it be the same sort of things, or would there be something slightly different that you would advise somebody like that?
Look, I think, I look back, I was actually working at Bain when I moved from being, can you believe it, head of finance. That seems a long time ago. And I became the head of HR. It was only a small office of Bain then. I think the important thing is that, there is a difference. So you have to remember when you go into HR, because all of a sudden, actually, I'm afraid I have to say this, actually, you have to be a little bit more distant. So, if you're in sales and you go into HR, some of the things that you do in sales might not necessarily be, people might have a bit of a problem with that. there is a little bit of a distance that I think you have to make, but the same things apply, which is understand your business. If you're moving from one function into another company, into HR, then I would say do learn some of the theory as well. Again, find someone who's experienced in HR who can help you on this, and listen a lot as well. So I think a lot of the advice is the same, but if you've got work experience, you're just going to, you're going to change, because people are suddenly going to become wary of you. Actually, mind you, they might be a bit wary of you if you're in finance too, but there is a difference, and I noticed that actually.
Excellent. So the other thing, I mean, obviously, both of you have recruited into your own HR team. So obviously, there's part of it as well as the preparation for securing a role, and then there's obviously the actually securing of the role, really. So I suppose one of the things I was just interested in from a CV perspective, also give quite a bit of CV advice to candidates as well in terms of some of the things that they should do. And there's plenty of information about that stuff around on our website, and there's videos and things that I've done in the past on that sort of stuff. But from your perspective, when you see a HR CV, is there any sort of real big turn-offs that people should absolutely avoid? If they're coming, let's say they're an experienced HR professional now, but they're looking to join, say, your teams, is there anything in a CV that's a huge turn-off from your perspective?
I guess for me, the absence of numbers worries me enormously.
Okay.
So you can have beautiful narrative of how you've done things or you've taken responsibility for. I'd quite like a few numbers, and it doesn't necessarily mean I transformed the P&L if I'm in HR, but there is metrics if you look for it, and often the work we do can't be measured in some aspects, but most of what we do can and should be. So you would have done lots of things. Just make sure there's a number, a from to, on some of your achievements to really quantify, and it catches the eye. The brain loves a number; it goes straight in there. Doesn't have to filter or process a lot. I would back up what you've done with some numbers, and also talk about change. No one has a BAU role anymore. And don't sell yourself short. Don't talk about being responsible for something. Talk about what impact you made, the changes, and be that CV or interview. Carl is your friend. Context, action, result, and learning. If you can get that narrative across about what the context you were tackling, the action you took, the result, good or bad, and the learning you got, you went again, which goes back to some of the earlier points that Caroline were making about applying things to their work. Get that Carl in your system, and have numbers behind it. Would be my two top tips.
Sorry, Caroline.
No, go ahead. Yeah,
I was just going to say that one of the same sort of advice that I give in terms of making sure that there's some sort of tangible achievements to it, and also one of the things I like to see is size and scope, because I mean, a business partner, and then there's just duties, and you think, well, it could be anything, it could have been doing anything. So yeah, certainly I use, and it's probably also very familiar, is the STAR technique, as well as one of the advice that I give to a lot of people when they're doing that. Caroline, you were going to say?
Yeah, look, gosh, I mean, I think of the thousands of CVs that I've read, and what are the ones that attracted me, ones that put me off. I guess I don't like really long CVs, actually. Which is kind of trying to tell a story. And I always say to people, because I do give people advice on CVs, actually, you really want to leave something to make things. I'd like to know more about that. To make it a bit of a, oh gosh, this is a person I really like to meet. I I also agree with it's important, to kind of list your achievements, not your job description as well. It's astonishing, actually. And how many people just tend to write their job description, and again, I agree, when you get to the interview, it's really important to be able to talk fluently about something. I mean, if there's something on your CV and you didn't really do it, it'll come out in nanoseconds in the interview to a good interviewer, The other thing I really don't like are manufactured CVs. And you think, well, what does that mean? It means that the ones where I've read too many, I've been on the internet for too often, and I've just taken, cut and pasted, or overblown personal statements, which make me think, wow, you walk on water, but, probably not here. And what I really like to see as well, what I like to see and what I don't like not to see is where people just talk about I. I also like numbers because I'm pretty numerate, and I expect people, if they've been in a business, to understand it. But I also want people to acknowledge that very often they're part of a team and it wasn't just down to them. And I'm showing my age a bit here. I'm really not very keen on pronouns in CVs either. But that's just me. And maybe because I have a very diverse background, actually, I don't like to label myself. But anyway.
Yeah, interesting. And I think a lot of those things are very similar to what I advise when I talk to candidates as well. I have on my LinkedIn profile, if anybody wants to look down there is actually a document that I put together, some advice about the first third of a CV, things like SEO in there as well, lots of different things that would build upon the what you guys have said in relation to CVs, and hopefully that'll be really useful. If anybody can't find it, then just drop me a note and I'll send you a copy of that document. So it's all there. But yeah, sort of tangible achievements I think are really important. We like to know size and scope. We want to see obviously where you can, as Meirion says, some results of some of the things that you've been doing, and the CARL is a great technique to make sure you're doing that. I suppose some of this I feel kind of also lends itself to the actual interview process, right? So when you're given examples in your CV, in the interview process, you kind of want to do some of the similar things, I suppose. So, I mean, from your guys' perspective, what advice would you give if there was sort of one piece of advice that you would really give in terms of to prepare for an interview? What would that be?
Karen, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Okay. How dreadfully polite. Right. So, look, the basics are called, research the company, know your stuff. I think my main piece of advice was try and make it a conversation. You hopefully you've got an interviewer on the other side of the table who knows how to get the best out of candidates through a conversation. But sometimes they're not. And I read a piece of research about 6 months ago, which was trying to understand why candidates in roles seem to be more successful than those that were not. And look, there are a number of reasons, but one of them could be the confidence to have a conversation when you're currently in a role. Whereas if you're searching for a role and need to get one, sometimes you clam up. And if you have a questioner on the other side of the table who isn't a conversationalist as such, you can easily get into question answer. And if you can get into a conversation, it's far more useful and honest and enlightening for both. And also, Carla mentioned sales coming across earlier on. A little tangent would be, we can learn a lot from our marketing and sales colleagues, and the best sales leaders understand the customer. How do they do that? They ask questions. So if you can somehow weave in your inquiry, your curiosity into a conversation, everyone loves to speak about themselves, present company accepted, of course. So if you can get into a conversation with an interview, then you will elicit more out, you will learn more about them, and vice versa. And a conversation with facts and curiosity and achievement and a drive that brings you out, the true you out, brings them out, and you end up in a far better place following that conversation.
Yeah, look, there's not a lot I can add to that, except I was actually really terrible at interviews. So again, and but I've done so many interviews in my career, and I sort of think about that, and I think about the best ones that I've had. The best ones, exactly as you said, Meirion, which is where people have clearly taken trouble to prepare for it, and are going to bring something to conversation. A good interviewer should always make you want to open up, will put you at ease. Actually, I hate the whole hostile type of interviewing, because I think, people clam up. But I think as an interviewee, you should also listen as well. Nerves sometimes get in the way, and it's easy to talk, but listen and watch, because it is a two-way street. And you're trying to get to know each other, and I think that's really important if you're being interviewed. Actually, I say that to my children. You're interviewing the company as well. Is this going to be right for you? It's got to work for both parties. And I think very often actually candidates don't necessarily think too much about that. The other thing is the pragmatism and saying what being authentic. Gosh, that's a bit of an overused word, but really try to be yourself. Again, a good interviewer will just see through a mile. I can't tell you the number of fake people that you meet. Usually it's the senior ones, So, but be yourself, and look, if it's not right, you get rejected, then it's just not right, and it probably wasn't going to be right. So, but just a few things really to add to that.
Yeah. I mean, for fans of The Apprentice, Claude is very entertaining as a torturer, but not particularly good interviewer. And if you're faced with one of them, then try your best. But that's frankly their style. It works for them, doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things about preparation. I mean, I find that it's very different scales. You get some people that don't really prepare enough, and they go in for this, the conversation style, but they're not really prepared. They just think, I'll go and have a chat, and then they don't never really bring out the examples that are really going to show their capability or where they potentially think they might match. It's difficult to do things in terms of from a culture perspective, which is going back to the earlier points you were talking about culture and checking that would fit with you. It's more difficult till you're in the interview. But and then you get others that do so much that they've almost got like a war room, and they've got so much information, they've really over-prepared, and they're actually a little bit confused about what it is that their proposition is to a potential interviewer and to a business. So I always advise a lot of my candidates, certainly that go through us, I spend time to do a little bit of interview coaching with them. And the three things I normally say is, have examples ready to show that you're capable of doing the role. And there's a bit more context behind this, and I support them with it. Be really clear about what it is in terms of why you're interested in the company, the role, and also what development areas you think, what you might learn from going into the position, because no one wants to hire anybody who can do it standing on the head, or they won't be challenged, and then they'll get bored and they'll be gone in 6 to 12 months. And I don't want that for my clients. So, and then the other side is just being self-aware. So think about the skills that you bring outside of, one of my achievements is this, but actually what skills do you bring as a person? Is that influencing? Is that communication? Is it problem solving, or whatever it might be? Is it being analytical? And being really clear about what the proposition that you bring to the table. Once you're clear with that, then obviously you can ask those questions. One of the questions I really like, and it's really kind of fluffy in a way. So like, Caroline, you've been here for 4 or 5 years. What is it that keeps you? Why do you enjoy working here so much? Because you get such an insight in terms of what the culture's like, and whether that's going to be a place that will suit you or not. And I think that's really, really important. And there's, I've been criticised in the past actually by some people for looking at culture fit as one of my metrics, saying about diversity. But actually, if you go into an organisation that's not going to fit you culturally, you'll be there after 2 months. You'll be wanting to get out, because this is not a place that really suits what's natural for me. So you've got to find what suits you and will help you thrive within your within your role and what's going to stretch you. So yeah, so I do quite a bit of support on that, and it's not just to support candidates, it's also for my clients. I want them to be really clear about the candidates I'm putting in front of what they bring to the table and what they don't potentially bring to the table, so they can make a really good informed decision as to whether, which candidate would be the best person for them to get on board, really. So yeah, I do think interview preparation and interviews is a skill. Caroline, you said it's not something you're strong at, but you've had a very successful career. I think by everybody's pretty much measurement, I think there's a lot of people that would say it's been a huge success. So
Got better
yeah, it's
over
definitely
the years.
yeah. So yeah, were there any horror stories? You said about any interview horror stories from either of you, or generally?
I do recall back in my Santander days, we a guy called Andrew Fox and I interviewed somebody, and it was the warm up, tell me a little about yourself question. So 35 minutes later,
was there any follow-up questions, or was it just literally
wake us up? We saw the chap again, and he's surprise, we hired him. He was great, and he's now got on to do great things within financial services. And the content was good, but you just had no control. And I let him go just to make a point. But you've got lots. We've all got lots of stuff in our back catalogue. Just as you say, make sure you've got those examples ready. Going back to Caroline, a little bit of leave them wanting more. It's the warm-up question is just to get you going and make sure that you've got of your back catalogue of stuff you've done to weave that in. But yeah, that was an interesting 35 minutes, which he then learned a lot from, as you can imagine.
Excellent, thanks for sharing that. So from a career perspective, just moving on, so assuming now you're in your HR career, and you've got those sort of career decisions, there's quite a few questions that I get quite regularly, so I'm going to pitch them at you and see what you guys think in relation to them. So I often get asked, should I go and specialize, or should I stay as a generalist? And then also, when is a good time for me to go and specialize? So when I say specialize, I mean in terms of things like compensation and benefits, or something around people analytics, or something around that sort of space. What's your view in terms of is it better to at what point might you go down that route, or should would a good, for example, HR leader stayed in the generalist route and kind of picked out those specialists that work alongside them?
Well, let me kick off, because I came in from finance. So I started, actually, I came back from maternity leave and became, and instead of being head of finance, I was then head of compensation and benefits, which was an interesting thing to do. So I started in specialism and then moved into generalist HR. I mean, this was back in the 80s and 90s, really. So I did everything. Now, what I would say is I always think, and I've talked to lots of HR business partners about this, I think it's good to do some specialisms. I don't think you have to do everything. I really don't think it matters when you do it in your career, except if you're going to be an HR leader. I personally have a view that it's helped if you've done at least one or two specialisms, perhaps in people development, or the comp and ben one is the one that a lot of HR people find most uncomfortable. But I think it's worth doing because it's a really important topic, the whole reward thing. And if you ever want to be the head of HR and an ex-com and you're dealing with a remuneration committee, you really ought to know what you're talking about, or at least know enough to be able to hire the best C&B person you can. So I think that's important. For someone who's been head of comp and ben, say, to go straight into the head of HR role, I've seen it happen. I think it depends on your temperament. And the most important thing is recognizing what you don't know and really making sure that the team around you brings the specialisms that you don't have, so you have the balance.
Cool. Yeah. I'd probably say two contradictory things, and I've just seen a question from Perry, which I'll try and answer on the hoof. So the more variety you have, the better. Not necessarily because of the specialisms you acquire, but you will join different dots. So that if you have some L&D and some reward and some ER, your thinking will be influenced by that polyglotness of moving around. But to contradict all of that, ultimately, no one can spend enough time being a specialist in everything, and your senior leadership role is going to ask you to manage ambiguity, and manage specialists that know far more than you.
Yeah.
So I think, but variety is in order to make you a more rounded and more. And change the thinking, and so that you bring more variety to your role. But actually, the big progression ask is, how can I manage a function that I know very little about? And Perry's asked the question, how can somebody with an unorthodox approach to some of these disciplines, how can they flourish? Well, look, there's a reason why you're an orthodoxy. Either you're trying something that is different just because you are of that mindset, or something ain't working. So we've all spent years and years on getting performance management right, or trying to get reward right, or incentivization. If you're unorthodox, then you're doing that for a reason, and if it works, then keep pursuing it and keep articulating it as an alternative means to solving a problem we haven't solved yet. And it's all about requisite variety. If we can, the more variety we've got, the more diversity we've got, the more skilled we are going to be solve those solutions. And don't go into HR and deploy the solutions that, well, we've always done it this way. We've always done forced ranking, or we've done that. Just try it and build a case and get in there. And variety will win the day as long as it solves the problem.
Look, I just comment on Perry as well. I absolutely agree with what you said, Meirion, there, but I think the thing is, it's horses for courses, really. So I personally like to have people who would kind of come left field, and and you realize, actually, or I hope we all realize this, as we get older, you get a bit stuck in your ways. So it's great to have someone who brings something different, someone who's looking on the outside. Particularly, the external focus is really, really important. So you don't, we've done it this way forever. But I also think it's important to think, if it's not accepted or it's not working here, why is that? And to do the kind of self-awareness bit, which is it because, you said, which is, it's just not going to work here, and there are lots of good reasons. It's not that it's a terrible idea, it's just not going to work. Or really, this isn't the right type of organization to try, and maybe I ought to be thinking about taking my ideas elsewhere. I think it's a very personal thing, but I would say just keep at it, be unorthodox and be provocative, but make sure you've got good colleagues who'll back you up as well.
Yeah, I always think with those that are unorthodox, they're the ones actually that normally are the ones that progress the profession as well. So their careers may not necessarily go down the mainstream sort of place, but they are the ones that perhaps look at things a different way and become sort of advisors, consultants, and things like that. I mean, Perry himself is arguably a bit unorthodox. Some of the people that have really sort of challenged the thinking, Heiko Fischer, for example, those sorts of characters, have a huge impact on the progression of the HR profession. So sometimes their careers don't necessarily go down that way, but they go down a slightly different way, and they end up making a huge impact. So thanks, Perry, for your question. And I can also see that Naomi Asher the non-executive director of HR Recruitment Solutions. So she's my mentor when we talk about mentors. Has shared the blogs for how to write a good CV and how to prepare for an interview. So there's some information on there for those in the chat as well. So just on this special,
just one final for me is we've all read about the death of the interview and the death of the CV for the last 25, 30 years. Now, one day it will come true. And therefore, some sort, obviously your presence on LinkedIn, how you're networking, how you're seen in a more of a virtual world, the video blog, all those sorts of things. They will evolve, and that will become the dominant means of getting yourself out there. So we don't know what that's going to be, but try and be as prepared as you can to adopt whatever that new evolving technology, that new evolving means is going to be. We can't predict, but it will happen. It will happen.
Thank you. In terms of when we're on sort of specialisms, I'm going to slightly flip it, but it's kind of the same sort of thing. So I have candidates sometimes that specialize in banking, and that's pretty much all that they've done. And I have other candidates that would go, the last thing I want to do is to stay within one sector and be pigeonholed and seen as part of that sort of institution of a particular sector. Now, Caroline and Meirion, I know that you've both had careers that have gone across different sectors, so I'm imagining you might be of the latter point. But in your view, would it be, if you're looking to really progress your career, is it better to say just stay within pharmaceuticals or banking or manufacturing and just stay within that industry and really understand that industry inside and out for your career? Or would you say that it's actually better to go into different sectors and industries? Because I get asked this quite a lot. So I'd be very interested in both of your takes on it, in terms of whether you see as a good thing to stay within industry, or actually whether your own advice would be to become a better HR leader potentially in the future, that they should probably look at going into different sectors. What's your view? Who would like to go first?
Well, can I maybe comment on this? Because you're right. I mean, I've moved across many different industry sectors, and the one thing I learned is people are people. And I actually found it helped me. As long as you don't think, oh, well, it's like this in this sector, so it's going to be like that in another. But I actually think it does broaden your thinking. So, for example, I went from sort of healthcare, which is extremely long term, to develop a drug takes many years. So long term thinking, then into financial services where, a credit card or a new product is there. And I thought that was great. I learned a lot. And but the people were the same. I think what's more important than actually the sector is actually the type of experience you have. And what I also found I learned, good and bad, was actually I've worked for companies, one memorable early in my career that almost went bankrupt. And we were sort of in intensive care. And I was I was promoted too quickly, probably. But literally where you're fighting for your company to stay alive, and you're having to do a fire sale. So that's great experience. And then to one that was acquired 6 months after I joined it in a hostile takeover. So that's, again, a very different type of experience. And I learned from that. And then if you're in a fast growth company, so I would say when I was in, for example, GE, what was, meteoric growth in the sector that I happened to be in, all of a sudden almost, was flushed down the toilet when the financial crash came. So the breadth of experience that you can get, good and bad, you learn from it, is as important as the industry sector. That's what I will look for, rather than, oh gosh, this person, has to have some banking. In some industries, you have to, if, for example, financial service helps if you've got regulatory, the experience of it, but it depends on the role. Yeah,
absolutely right. And context is king, and you can have more difference between companies within a sector than across sectors. And I would say this, wouldn't I? I've always followed the role and the job and the board, etc. And the sector, I continue to be agnostic about. The realities are, however, particularly in economic downturns, that hirers will use sector as a criteria, and therefore, if they've got 50 CVs or whatever the new CV is by then, they will just as a mechanism to cut it down to 10 will filter out on sector. So if you want that progression, then you may well want to pick a sector and move within, but be aware you are limiting your opportunities, those chance encounters, to get more experience. So over the long term, my view would remain that the more sectors you go into, the more chance you're going to get, the more learning, the more random, unstructured stuff that's going to happen to you. That's where you're going to learn from. And I think also, Caroline, the influence of one of the last things you said was, I certainly have learned as much from bad companies and bad sectors as I have good ones.
Yes.
And on my deathbed, I'll tell you who they are. But before then, my lips are sealed. So you just go out there, be open, don't overplan these things. He said rather randomly, and just be open to the opportunities that different sectors can.
I think just a point of what you were saying about sectors and hiring managers looking at sector. I think there are certain sectors that are quite closed. I mean, obviously, we mentioned banking as an example, and obviously, it does help if you have that understanding of things like the FCA or the regulations and things like that. But I find actually that normally very few hiring managers I talk to use that as a way of screening out in terms of sort of experiences and things. It's becoming less and less. But I sometimes get assignments where they say, we want them to have worked within pharma. And I've had that, and I've recruited for that, and I've had it as one of the things I need to look for. And as a headhunter, you are looking to provide the very best possible match that you possibly can for your client that's available in the market at the time. And not just somebody who can do the job, but somebody who's going to really fit into the business and make a substantial impact. So, but I have to say that it's actually quite rare from my experience now that that I get a hiring manager say that. And certainly when I submit a shortlist, it's not normally something. I quite like it if you get sectors that are quite similar. So if you've got, for example, if they've been in engineering, they might be manufacturing, or if there's hospitality, you might be able to look at sort of tourism, or if it's tech, you might be able to. There's normally some areas that actually really work, and then they bring a different sort of background, different experiences that will actually, really hopefully add some fresh impetus into that. So yeah, just my view on that side. The other question I get a lot from candidates, and actually sometimes it's actually me sort of tempering them down a little bit, is their sort of obsession with going upwards in terms of their career. And I can understand that, but those candidates that want to be CHROs or CPOs or whatever you want to refer to them as, head of HRs, directors, whatever, is that their sort of linear trajectory is the most important thing, and quite often I wonder actually whether it's a good move sometimes to say, actually, I'll do a kind of a lateral position, but something where I might be able to develop and learn. But in theory, might be relatively similar in terms of size or scope, or something not necessarily seen as a step upwards. What's your view? When is it ready? When is somebody ready for a step up? And when should somebody maybe potentially be looking at doing something different, but perhaps at a sort of lateral sort of level? Do you have any sort of guidance for somebody in terms of that?
So I'll give you a sort of personal perspective on this, which was, I was promoted very quickly early in my career. I was head of HR. It was a fairly small company, but this is the one that almost went bankrupt. And then I got out of it. And I was looking for my next job, and I knew there's no way I'm not ready to be a CHRO. And I actually took, I looked for the right person to work for, to learn from, and the opportunity and the type of company. The fact that it was taken over 6 months later didn't help, but it was the best thing that I could have done. And I think lateral moves, particularly if you feel you've moved very fast early in your career and you think, gosh, I need to consolidate, or I need to build some expertise, I want some depth, or I'm going to learn a new industry area or something like that. I would say what's right for you at the time. Also, I can say this, what's right for your family as well. Because I personally think, if you're chasing all the time, that can get a bit wearing for everybody, you included. So I think lateral moves are perfectly fine. If I see that on someone's CV, doesn't worry me. I just might want to explore it a bit, what happened. Or if you're going into a new area of expertise, it makes sense too.
Yeah. On that chasing bit, be careful what you wish for. So what one day you're an expert doer and you're a huge individual contributor, adding huge value to the business by doing some stuff. Then you're managing others, and suddenly the control isn't there, and you either love or hate empowering and coaching and managing others. And then you find yourself avoiding getting stabbed in the back by your board members, or some other horrific, heinous C-level set of activities. So be bloody careful what you wish for. I would say rather cynically, and also, in life, be careful you don't focus on the first mountain, which is all the career stuff. Get to the top, and realize this isn't what life is about. And then I need to look at my second peak in terms of fulfillment and the family and all those sorts of things. So be careful what you wish for, and sometimes realize, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and I'll go off and do something else. And I think also HR seems to be slightly less hierarchical than other professions. So you can get that breadth, you can get that enjoyment from lateral moves and be appropriately remunerated for that, without necessarily having to either manage managers or manage 2 or 3 layers. So we're fortunate, I think, in that sense, that you can get to the top if that's what you want to be, and not have to manage 10,000 colleagues as a chief exec needs to do. So the hierarchy isn't so pressing for us, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that when I talk to candidates, one of the first questions I ask is, what are your career aspirations? What are your longer term goals? And you'll be surprised actually how many people don't necessarily have that in mind. And one of the things when I ask them that is partly because I'm trying to assess if their career goal is to be a HR business partner. Let's say they see that as though they don't want to be doing the strategic stuff. They want to be working with people in the business, and that's where they see their career goal. But they might want to do it maybe internationally or something like that. And I always think, well, if you know where you're going, you can kind of make sensible decisions about when you step up and also when you step across. Because actually, what you don't want to do is go so far so fast, and then I don't know, redundancy hits, and you've not necessarily broadened out the skill set that you would need, to be able to be a business partner, for example, before maybe going up the further end. So I see it as quite important that people are aware about, and think longer term where I'm going to make good career decisions. That's my personal opinion. It's a very short question, this one. Do you agree that is important? Or do you think it doesn't really matter? Because Meirion, you sort of said earlier that actually just seizing the opportunities and things like that. So I'm wondering whether that falls in line with your view about people's careers, or just seeing what kind of lands on people's plates, as it were.
We all look at our CVs and present it as a beautifully manufactured military campaign, exquisitely delivered within half an hour of each element. And that's bollocks. we write our CVs. I wrote my CV in hindsight. So Tim Minchin, God bless him, would say just be open to the 4 or 5 opportunities in front of you. Be clear on where you are. Be clear on what the next right step is for you, and take those steps. And sometimes gingerly, put the toe in the water. Find out where those rocks are when you're trying to cross this river. If you've got a rough idea of where you want to go, great, but know that by the time you got there, you'll be in a different place. So I think I'm far more chaotic and here and now than I should be, and frankly should not be on this panel. Therefore, but yeah, that's just my more random view of the world in hindsight.
I think I'll channel the inner Natalie as well, because I think she would probably say the same, because I think she's definitely not had. I think she said before that she's probably not had the the typical sort of perfect sort of HR career, and starting did lots of different roles and some lateral moves and things like that. And obviously she's, I think last year was voted one of the most influential people in HR, and made a huge impact amongst lots of people, and certainly people coming into the profession and things like that. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying, Caroline. Were you going to build upon that, or?
I was probably going to violently agree with that there, which is,
okay.
To be honest, actually, I must say at the start of my career, I didn't. My motivations were maybe a little different, I guess, which is a bit about where I came from. So I wanted to be able to take care of my family and have a good, enjoy myself while I was working, because it was going to be for a long, long time. I never thought that I would give up for work. We were definitely, it was important that we were, both earning and a dual career family. So I never really planned it. And when during maybe the 90s, 2000, being acquired several times, the best laid plans get thrown under a bus. So I'm a little bit of the kind of, carpe diem, which is seize the day, seize the moment, make the most of what you got and enjoy what you're doing, rather than be worried about that next step. I can tell you, when you interview people who are so clinical about it, you think, my goodness, they're so single-minded. I know I'm going to be a CEO, and very often they never get there. So I'm all for the more, and again, maybe it's an age thing there, but I think have fun along the way, and don't be too rigid in your plans, because it won't work out in the way you probably thought anyway, but it might be better.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to ask 2 questions to end the show, and then we will do obviously our reveals, of course, as well. So the first one I'm going to ask is about outside of a day-to-day for a HR professional. I find sometimes HR, they're so busy, they don't really have time for anything else, especially if they've got families and all that sort of stuff as well on top of it. But what other things should HR professionals be doing in order to supercharge their career? So I was thinking around this, we talked about mentors, CIPD, for example. Could it be books, articles, what kinds of things? Should they, for example, be engaging in podcasts like hosting HR, for example, outside of their day-to-day? What kinds of advice, apart from watching and listening to the podcast of hosting HR, would you give to HR professionals to supercharge their career? So it'd be great to get an answer from both of you. Meirion, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess if I would have done anything earlier, I would have read more,
Okay.
and reading. And it sounds really dreadful, but I went to a seminar 10 years ago, and the chief HR officer said, "Then you just go read a book. Go read a book. You can curate some great thought leaders on LinkedIn. You've got podcasts. What one of, I think, the legacy gifts of COVID, if you can describe it a gift, it is this sort of stuff. We've got far more access now to podcasts, panelists, etc. So be as diverse as you can in terms of reading and getting stuff in, and sign up to someone's views who you think are abhorrent and contradictory to yours, because I will really challenge your thinking. So don't fight the echo chamber, and that means going outside of HR. So what is sales doing these days? What is IT doing these days with Agile Manifesto? How are they battling with that different way of working? What are project managers doing? All of those sorts of things. But then stop. Take some time out in smell the flowers, man. Smell the flowers. If you obsess with your career, you'll end up not getting what you want. So the counterintuitive advice is have a laugh, do what else floats your boat, because otherwise you will perversely not have the career you want.
Before you come in, Caroline, I just want to say, if anybody's unsure what HR book to potentially read, we've got a whole playlist on our Hosting HR YouTube channel. I think we've got something like 17 interviews I've done with HR authors, all kinds of books on there. So yeah, that's a good starting point. I just thought it was a perfect little segue for me to add that in. A little bit of promotion about the HR book club. Obviously, Natalie is also on there. There's an interview with hers for Launch a HR Career as well. So there's all sorts of stuff on there. So go check it out. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be some options there. Sorry, Caroline, what's your advice?
It's going to be a bit of do what I say rather than what I did, because I was terrible at reading. Oh God, management books and various books. I could have done with during my career the sort of Blinkist, the app that you can get that summarizes all of the great thinkers in 15 minutes. I could have done with that early in my career, actually. That would have been good. And I think that, I guess a bit of the challenge today is there's so much that you really have got to work out what works for you. And if you prefer I prefer podcasts often now to reading the books. So I wish that, again, that had been around. And I would actually say as well, is outside of the profession, if you get on to be the executive committee, you happen to be the specialist in HR, but you're there primarily to be a business leader who is going to contribute and have to take votes on, should we be following this R&D or business development strategy or buy this company? So if you don't have that breadth of business acumen, understanding the numbers, being able to contribute to the board meeting, then I think that's far more of an issue for you if you're a CHRO than if you've read the latest, theory. I think it's nice if you can do both. But networking is also very good. Get friendly with finance and with your chief commercial officer and your people in marketing. The other thing I would say to do is, if you can, mini secondment, actually, to learn about other functions. And you can do that, swaps. A lot of companies, they used to do that. Maybe, I'm sure they still do. And now, if you're sort of at the beginning of your career, mid-career is a great time to do that, because you find it harder when you are very senior. But I endorse everything that you've both said, really.
Thank you. So the last question is the final thoughts from you guys. So it might actually be quite similar to this, actually. So one piece of advice that you would give to an ambitious HR professional, what would that? This is like silver bullet stuff. Like if all the rest of it we could just get rid of. This is just a little highlight bubble right now. So one piece of advice to an ambitious HR professional, what would it be? Go.
Okay, don't be expedient. Keep your ethical standards in HR.
Fantastic.
Meirion?
Don't take yourself too seriously. Take the piss out of yourself and everyone around you. Because we've got so much.
Else will.
Precisely. Look, irony is your friend. If you can step back and look at two contradictory, insane options and try and laugh it off, it's going to make your decision making that so much easier. So take the piss.
Okay, that's the okay. We'll go with that. So let's do our 2 lies and 1 truth reveals. So obviously we both said, or you both said, 3 facts each. So Caroline, you started. Do you want to remind us of
Yeah.
your 3 facts? Can you remember them?
Yes, my granddad was born in 1866. I played
Yep.
hockey for my county under 16s. And if I was to start my career again, I'd probably stay in finance rather than HR.
What do you think, Meirion?
Well, I think the lie is stay in finance.
So there's 2 lies, remember?
2 lies, and I think the second lie is clearly Caroline is younger than an 1866 grandfather, so that's clearly the second lie. So I'm going to go for hockey.
See, I'm also going to say, my instinct was hockey, but I feel like I should go for the same thing as you, just to make it a bit more interesting. But no, I'm going to stick with my guns. I'm going to say hockey for Lancashire.
You're right. That's not the truth. You want the truth? No, my granddad was in 1866.
Wow.
He was over 60 when my dad was born.
Wow.
So
wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Gosh. Okay. Meirion, remind us of your 3 facts.
Yeah, no, one of which I've forgotten. So
that'd be a false lie then, I suppose.
Indeed.
Or is that the truth?
Yes, a double negative.
Singer was one of them.
32 bottles of water I got written down.
Yes, so it was my wife and I, Lisa and I, had to drink 32 bottles of water putting on a flight. My father was an opera singer, and I'm also very good at making up lies on the spot.
The last one is the lie, I think. Go on, Caroline. I should let you go first.
Oh gosh. Well, because you're Welsh, I can actually quite believe that your dad was an opera singer. So I've got to believe then the lie was the water and the making up.
So the water makes. So you're going opera singing. I don't understand the I don't understand the water one at all. I don't understand what that's all like. Which might mean that the last one might be true, that you're useless at making up lies. So I'm going to go actually with the third one, that you're useless at making up lies.
Right. Okay. No, the truth is, so my wife's a Kiwi, and we had twins. And within a couple of months, we flew back to New Zealand with Rhys and Mia, and consequently had to have enough milk for them for the flight. So we got to Heathrow with 32 bottles with that much 20 mils water, and enough powder to implement them for over a 24-hour flight. I think this was around 9/11. Anyway, it was whatever hideous terrorist act had just happened, and therefore we were quite rightly hyper paranoid about fluid being smuggled in as a bomb. So we had to sip 32 bottles of water to prove that it was water. And we did that on the way into Heathrow. So yes, that is a bizarre but true fact.
Wow, that's a great story. It's just the most random story, but yeah, okay, good. Yeah, did it delay the plane? That's a lot of. I suppose it wouldn't take that long.
No. We had a few grumpy people behind us in the queue, but no.
I can imagine.
The flight took off on time.
Right.
My children didn't delay a 24-hour long haul flight for once.
Excellent. Well, that's all from us on Hosting HR today. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Caroline and Meirion, for being part of the panel. And the next show will be on culture change, which will be coming up next month. So certainly go subscribe to the YouTube channel, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, it will come up on LinkedIn Live as well, or follow the company page on Facebook, as the shows all go on there. But my best bet is to say go to the YouTube page, because there's lots of information for the book clubs, including Perry Timms, who's just made a comment as well. He's on there as well. So there's lots of stuff on that YouTube page that I hope will be very, very useful. I hope you found today useful, took some tips, plenty of food for thought, and thank you all again